Tyler Granger sat in the cold, humming silence of Courtroom 3B, the kind of silence that presses against your skull like it's trying to keep a secret. His sneakers barely brushed the floor, too big for his feet and too clean for the stories his eyes carried. The judge leaned back, a smirk barely curling at the corner of his mouth, flipping through Tyler's case file like it was a high school prank. Graffiti, resisting arrest, disrespecting authority. A chuckle slipped out, the kind that fills empty rooms with something darker than sound. "You think you're tough, son?" he said, his gavel tapping the edge of his bench like a clock winding down. "Maybe a few nights in county will help you figure out who you're not." A few officers in the back laughed quietly. The courtroom wasn't laughing. It was holding its breath. That's when the door opened. The man who walked in didn't belong to this world. Not this small-town courtroom, not this day, not even this century. He wore a dark blue uniform, the insignia shining like ghosts under the cheap fluorescent lights. 4 stars, polished boots, a face carved from 1,000 decisions nobody else wanted to make. The kind of man who didn't knock when he walked into a room, because rooms adjusted themselves to him. No one stood up. No one could. Even the judge, Judge Callahan, a man who once made a war vet cry on the stand, froze like he was remembering something he had spent decades trying to forget. His lips parted, but no sound came out. Tyler didn't turn to look at the man. He didn't have to. He whispered just 3 words, so softly it might have been prayer or warning. "That's my father." And the silence broke like glass. If you're watching this, it means you've already felt it. That edge of the couch sickness in your gut. That cold recognition that something is wrong not on the surface, but beneath it, deep and familiar. This isn't one of those courtroom clips that go viral for laughs or justice served with a punchline. No, this is something different. You'll think about this long after the video ends. Because this story doesn't care if you believe it or it's already inside you. Later that night, the court security footage would vanish. Not a glitch, not a file error. The entire server room showed no evidence of being accessed, and yet the data was clean wiped, surgical. The only clue left behind was a time-stamped screen recording, 21 seconds long, uploaded anonymously to a forum that no longer exists. In it, the screen flickers. A grainy image of Tyler's face, then audio distortion, then a voice, not his. It whispered the name, Clara. A name no one in the room claimed to hear, but every single one of them wrote down independently during debriefing. Even the stenographer, whose transcript remained untouched except for one line. The IZI child remembers, but that's not what changed everything. The real fracture came 3 days later when Judge Callahan, known for his unshakable presence and unrelenting decisions, was found in his home, alive, unharmed, but unable to speak. On his living room wall, scrawled in what appeared to be his own handwriting and fingernails, was a message. He knew the stars weren't real. And in Tyler's holding cell, his bunk was empty. His clothes folded neatly. One word scratched into the metal bed frame with impossible precision. Returned. So the question isn't what happened in that courtroom. It's what happened years before. And why no one asked who Tyler Granger really was. Until now. The moment Tyler's bunk stood empty was supposed to be the final word. A clean break from reality. The undeniable fracture that shattered everything. But instead, it cracked open a deeper void. One filled not with answers, but questions that burrowed under the skin like splinters you couldn't pull out. You start wondering if what you saw was real, or if it was just the first tremor of something far darker lurking beneath the surface. Because sometimes, the truth doesn't come in a slam of revelation. It comes as a whisper, a doubt, a flicker, in the corner of your eye, twisting your memories until they no longer feel like your own. In the hours after Tyler vanished, the courthouse became a cage of silence and suspicion. The officers who had laughed moments before now avoided each other's gaze, like they'd stumbled into a secret they weren't sure they wanted to share. And the recordings. Oh, the recordings. The court security footage wiped clean was replaced by backup files on a hidden drive nobody acknowledged at first. When someone finally played the tape, the images jumped, fractured like an old film reel spun too fast. There was Tyler, yes, but in one frame, his eyes flickered unnaturally, the colors shifting in a way no human eye could. The audio wasn't better. A low hum overlapped voices, sometimes whispering his name, sometimes spilling syllables that made your skin crawl, and underneath it all, a cracked voice repeating, "You don't remember." That voice was the first crack in my own certainty. I thought I'd seen everything. The raw edges of a courtroom turned strange, but that sound felt like a door creaking open in a house I'd thought was empty. I kept playing that tape over, the way people clutch at fragments when the whole story slips through their fingers. And each time, the voice seemed less like a glitch and more like a warning. What if this wasn't just about Tyler? What if the court, the judge, the entire system was a stage for something none of us were supposed to see? The real unsolved mystery wasn't the kid who vanished or the man who froze, but the whole undercurrent running beneath, what they don't want you to remember. The days bled into nights, and the line between memory and nightmare blurred. My own recollections became unreliable. I'd swear I saw Tyler in the shadows of the courthouse, standing just out of focus, his face melting into the walls. At times I'd hear his voice calling out, but when I turned there was only silence, and the faint smell of stale coffee and paper. Other times my phone rang, no caller ID, no answer when I picked up. Then the faintest breath, like a sigh, whispered through the line before the call dropped. Was it him? Or was I breaking apart, losing grip on what was real? And then came Avery. Avery Lane showed up one evening like a fragment from a half-remembered dream. Someone who claimed to have known Tyler before any of this. Her voice was soft, tremulous, like she carried a storm inside her lungs, and her eyes held secrets deeper than the night itself. But Avery was unreliable in the way that makes you lean in and listen, despite the warning screaming in your gut. She spoke in riddles, folding her past like origami. Bits here, fragments there, never whole, always elusive. One moment she told me Tyler was her brother, the next, that they'd barely met. Sometimes she'd cry quietly, then laugh in a way that felt off, too brittle for the moment. Her story was a puzzle made of missing pieces, memories that didn't line up, photographs that disappeared from her phone, messages she swore she sent, but no one received. "There are things you'll never understand," she whispered once, eyes wild in a cafe lit by flickering neon. "Things that don't want to be remembered." And in those words I caught the pulse of the fear running beneath everything, a fear that this wasn't just about a boy or a judge, but about the fragile cage of our minds, about the stories we tell ourselves to stay sane. We pored over every detail, the transcript, the court recordings, the strange time-stamped clips Avery somehow found buried in an archive marked confidential. Each one contradicted the last. In some, Tyler was defiant. In others, scared beyond words. Judge Callahan's silence morphed into cryptic journal. Entries leaked to us, his handwriting jagged and trembling, spelling out things no man in his position should know. But when we tried to verify any of it, records disappeared. Witnesses changed their stories, and the line between fact and fiction twisted tighter around us like a noose. The deeper we dug, the heavier the silence grew. Avery's eyes darkened with every new layer of secrets, and I started to wonder if she was leading me into a labyrinth with no exit, or if she herself was lost, caught between truth and madness. Our conversations echoed with things unsaid. Old trauma bleeding through her voice, the way she flinched at sudden noises. By then, I wasn't sure if the stars were a symbol or a code, or if I was simply unraveling the last threads of my own sanity. The days grew heavier, and the faces in the courthouse became ghosts, shifting and slipping through the cracks of memory. The truth behind what no one tells you about disappearance and power and silence. It was a puzzle designed not to be solved, but to be feared. And as the tape ended, I realized the deepest fear wasn't about a vanished boy or a frozen judge. It was about what happens when the world you trust is just a shadow play, and the people you lean on are whispers in the dark. Because sometimes the real unsolved mystery isn't what you see, it's what you don't see, what's deliberately hidden behind the veneer of everyday life. And now I wonder if I am the next to disappear. Or worse, if I already have and none of this ever happened at all. I thought I had it. The thread that would unravel the knot, the key to a locked door I'd been pounding on in the dark. The moment came like a shutter clicking, sharp and sudden, a jolt of clarity in a fog that had clouded everything for weeks. It was in the county archives, buried under piles of forgotten case files and dust. An old police report from 25 years ago that mirrored every shadow of this nightmare, right down to the cold courtroom, the vanishing boy, the frozen judge. The victim back then was a teenager named Cole Mercer. The parallels were so precise it was almost impossible to dismiss. Cole had disappeared after a similar hearing, one where the judge laughed at him before a man wearing the same 4-star. Insignia walked in and silenced the room. The report was vague, official enough to be plausible, but vague enough to leave a trail of unanswered questions. Case closed, it read, though no one really believed it had ever been solved. Holding that report, I felt the weight of years lift off my chest. The hidden truth wasn't buried in some cryptic recording or whispered voices. It was here, plain in the paperwork, a past tragedy looped back into the present like a grim echo. The courthouse had never been a place of justice. It was a stage for erasing inconvenient stories, for burying memories that threatened to fracture the fragile illusion of order. It felt like the final piece snapping into place, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I believed the mystery was uncovered, but the relief was a lie. A fragile, dangerous lie. The deeper I dug into Cole Mercer's story, the more the unease crept in. Slow and cold, like the creeping shadow of something watching from the edges of my vision. I found old testimonies, interviews with people who had known him, but each one carried the same thread of something unsaid. One witness, a woman who'd been Cole's closest friend, spoke of strange occurrences, shadows moving just beyond sight, voices that spoke in rooms where no one else stood. She swore she remembered Cole whispering a name no one else ever heard, the same name that had haunted the whisper on the corrupted tapes. Clara. Her words sent a chill down my spine because they weren't just recollections. They felt like memories being pulled from the dark, half-remembered dreams clawing their way back to consciousness. I realized then that this wasn't just a case of coincidence or cover-up. It was a pattern, a cyclical nightmare repeating itself decades apart, pulling in the same players, the same faces, and the same fractured truths. The courthouse was a nexus for something that wasn't meant to be remembered, a place where reality bent and broke, and memories warped into something unrecognizable. You think you're piecing together facts, but the more you assemble, the more you realize the picture is deliberately smeared, the edges blurred by design. And then, just when the pieces seemed to lock together, a detail emerged that shattered everything again. I found a photo tucked inside an old folder, grainy, faded, but unmistakable. It showed a man standing beside the courthouse steps, his uniform spotless, the 4 stars gleaming on his chest. But his face was not the same man I'd seen walk into Courtroom 3B with Tyler. It was a younger version of Judge Callahan himself. The judge, the man who had frozen in fear, the man who was supposed to be the arbiter of law and order, had worn those stars long before Tyler's case, long before Cole Mercer vanished. He wasn't just the victim of some shadowy authority, he was part of it. This revelation sent me reeling. The man who had been the symbol of justice was tangled in the mystery like a thread in a spider's web, both predator and prey. The 4 stars weren't just insignia of rank. They were a mark of a deeper allegiance, a connection to something lurking in the courthouse's darkest corners. That night, sleep refused to come. Images from my childhood flickered unbidden behind my eyelids, fragments of memories I'd buried. Long ago, faces I thought I'd forgotten, and the same feeling of being watched that now stalked my waking hours. There was a whisper inside my mind, faint but relentless. The same voice from the tapes, the same name repeated in a loop that felt like it was tugging at the edges of sanity. Clara. I realized that what I had been calling memory glitches were not malfunctions but pieces of a deeper truth clawing their way to the surface. You're not crazy. They lied to you. And then came the event I never expected. Something so disturbingly familiar I could barely breathe. I found myself drawn back to a forgotten place, the old abandoned courthouse annex where the walls still whispered with dust and secrets. There, in the dim glow of a flickering bulb, I saw the outline of a woman, a figure that vanished the instant I blinked, leaving only a cold draft and the faint scent of something I couldn't name but recognized. Deep in my bones, a presence that had been watching, waiting, always just beyond the edge of vision. It was neither human nor ghost, but something that made my skin crawl, like a pulse beneath the skin of reality itself. I felt it then, a weight pressing on my chest, tightening like a noose, a warning or perhaps a claim. The danger was not out. There, lurking in the shadows or hiding behind the courtroom doors. It was here, inside me, inside all of us. A force so deeply personal it defied logic. A hunger that feeds on forgotten truths and fractured memories. And just when I thought I could hold it together, I stumbled on a final devastating twist that forced me to look back at everything with fresh eyes. The first moment I saw Tyler in that courtroom, the laugh from the judge, the four-star man walking in, none of it matched the timeline of the archives. Tyler's name appeared in documents dated 5 years before his own disappearance. The recordings, the testimonies, even Avery's fragile stories, they all bent and twisted in impossible ways. This wasn't just a repeating nightmare or a case of history echoing forward. It was a loop, a fractured time folded back on itself, a story told backward and forward at once. The courthouse, the judge, the vanished boys, they were all trapped in a cycle that defied reason, and I was caught in it too. As I sit here piecing together memories that don't quite fit, hearing whispers that refuse to stop, I realize that everything I thought I understood was a lie, woven into a tapestry of silence and shadows. The mystery, uncovered, was only a mirage, and now every moment of this story, every word you've heard, every face you've seen demands a second look, because the truth isn't just hidden in the past. It's bleeding into the present, warping reality until the line between what is and what isn't collapses entirely. And so you watch again, searching for the cracks you missed, the lies beneath the lies, because the final revelation isn't a conclusion. It's an invitation into something far darker, far closer, and far more terrifying than you ever imagined. The unraveling did not happen in isolation. The truth I clawed toward was not mine alone. Somewhere beyond the flickering glow of my screen, beyond the cold shadows of forgotten courtrooms and vanished boys, others were watching, silent, unseen, their eyes tracing the same fractured outline of a story nobody wanted told. I began to realize this was never just my nightmare or Tyler's disappearance. It was a collective unease, a shared pulse of dread beating beneath the surface of normal life, binding strangers in a web of secrets and half-remembered horrors. They were out there, those who knew, those who remembered, and their presence was a whisper threading through the static of my every waking moment, a spectral audience watching a tragedy unfold from the shadows. The signs were subtle at first, almost easy to dismiss. At the edge of every message thread I chased, cryptic symbols began to appear, veiled in codes that slipped past casual eyes but stuck to mine like a magnet. Numbers, strange glyphs drawn. In the margins of online forums, images layered with hidden shapes barely perceptible to the human eye, but screaming their message once you learned to see. They were everywhere, in places you wouldn't expect, etched into the frame of a news broadcast, woven into the background of a local news anchor's report, or flashed for a split second in footage nobody knew existed. You weren't crazy for noticing. You were part of something older than the courthouse, deeper than any court case, more disturbing than the faded headlines they tried to bury. The buried truth, the stuff the government never released, was whispering through these signs, inviting us to look closer, to connect the dots no one else dared to trace. Then the dreams began. Not just mine. The shared dreams. dreams of shadowed, hallways of whispered voices calling names we didn't recognize but somehow knew, of figures dissolving before our eyes, leaving only fragments of memory tangled with raw emotion. Each night, strangers on distant message boards and private groups spoke of the same haunting visions. Some saw the judge, others the man with the 4 stars, some glimpsed Tyler or Cole, and others only felt the creeping presence, like a cold breath on the back of their necks, a touch they couldn't shake. These were not isolated incidents. They were threads in a larger tapestry, an unspoken network of people who were waking up inside the same strange dream, the same hidden story that unfolded beyond the veil of everyday life. In this growing collective of watchers, a third perspective emerged, a voice unlike the rest, neither lost in confusion nor tangled in despair. An observer who seemed detached yet intimately entwined, who spoke not in riddles but in unsettling clarity. Their messages appeared suddenly on encrypted forums and hidden chat rooms, fragments of insight that never directly named the danger, but painted it with chilling precision. This observer did not claim to know the full truth, only that the story we were piecing together was a symptom of something far greater, a force that had been watching us all long before Tyler's disappearance, long before Cole Mercer's fading from memory. They warned of a control so pervasive it shaped not just our reality, but the very fabric of identity itself. Memories planted and erased, personalities folded and refolded, a manipulation so subtle it slipped beneath the skin like poison. This force did not need to move in the shadows because it was the shadow, an ever-present weight on our collective consciousness. It was in the silences between words, in the memory glitches we dismissed as stress or trauma, in the inexplicable déjà vu that tingled at the edges of our minds. It was the reason the judge froze, the reason Tyler whispered a name no one else heard, the reason the courthouse stood silent and empty when it should have been alive with answers. And now, it was watching us, watching you, watching me, measuring how close we were to pulling the veil away and exposing the raw, unfiltered truth beneath. The deeper we pressed, the more fragile our grasp on reality became. Identity itself started to feel like a puzzle with missing pieces, memories bleeding into one another, moments we swore happened slipping through our fingers like smoke. Avery's stories grew more fractured, her truths tangled with lies and shadows, as if she was caught in the same current of control that bound us all. And me. What was left of me? Was I a witness or a puppet? Was I remembering or being fed? Memories? The question no longer felt rhetorical. What did it mean to know something, to hold on to a thread of truth when the ground beneath was shifting faster than you could follow? Somewhere deep in the static and the silence, I found a recording. Not the corrupted tapes from the courthouse, but something older, something raw and untouched. Found footage from 20 years ago, whispered about in conspiracies and rumors, but never before seen. A grainy clip of a courtroom much like the one Tyler sat in, with the same judge, the same insignia, and a boy who vanished mid-trial, his last words swallowed by the hum of the projector. The footage wasn't just proof of a pattern, it was proof of design, evidence that this was no accident, no random tragedy. It was a story being told, retold, and erased, a loop of control that stretched through decades, playing out across lives like a cold, methodical script. And yet, despite all this, the most terrifying part was the silence, the things left unsaid, the faces that never appeared in any record, the holes in the timeline that swallowed entire months, years, even lifetimes. The force behind it all never named itself, never showed its face, but its presence was undeniable. A shadow behind every shadow, a question mark etched into the very soul of the story. We had been right all along, to doubt, to fear, to question. The truth was not a destination but a trapdoor, and each revelation was a step deeper into a labyrinth without an exit. As you watch this, know that you are not alone. You are not just a spectator but a participant, drawn into a conspiracy older than memory, a game where identity is fluid and control is absolute. The watchers are many, their eyes invisible but unblinking, and the story is far from over. What you've seen, what you've heard, what you've felt. These are the cracks in the surface of reality, and behind them waits a darkness that does not forget, does not forgive, and never releases its hold. The question now is simple but impossible. How much of what you think you know is yours, and how deep are you willing to go to find out what lies beneath? The weight of the truth pressed against me with a force that was both crushing and liberating, like drowning in light. I had spent so long chasing the mystery of what happened, to Tyler, to Cole, to the judge, to the courthouse itself,